I'm sitting in my indoor basement cigar lounge. I can smoke cigars in here, have a drink, and I don't have to be outside. And in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the things I thought were important considerations for building out this room. And then at the very end, I'm going to give you a price breakdown of basically how much this room cost me to build out. Starting it off with the location, you have to start somewhere with a build. And luckily for me, there was already a larger basement build that I was doing, finishing the basement, which is just outside of this room. So there was already a contractor, there was already money involved, and there was already a ball rolling for a huge renovation in the house. Anyway, so we just tagged this onto that basically as another room in addition to the rest of the basement. With that in mind, as far as the location that I chose for this room, smoke does rise. So I think the best place to have put a cigar lounge indoors or in your home would definitely be an attic, if an attic space is available, or at least something on the top floor of the house. That way you're not worried about that smoke rising and getting anywhere else. If you're already at the top, it's just going to get out. However, like I mentioned, this room was always going to be part of a larger basement renovation, which means that and we'll talk about this later, I was going to have to take into account how to get the smoke out, but also how to make sure that the smoke didn't seep into the rest of the basement rooms or up into the floor above. What I did is I looked for the best location in the basement where I would have to run the shortest amount of ductwork. Obviously, I didn't want the ductwork or the smoke to be crossing any other part of the room or any other part of the basement. I didn't want this room to be sitting in the middle of the rest of that floor plan. So that kind of narrowed it down to me. I could either be in the middle of one of the external walls, or I could be in a corner. And there were two corners kind of still open and available. So that's what I decided. I decided to choose a corner of the basement. That way I had two external walls to leverage, and I'd only have to build out two internal walls. But more importantly than that is I'd be able to run ductwork for an exhaust fan directly outside without having to cross any other rooms, without having to go around any utilities or any fireplaces upstairs or anything. I could run just one 6-inch, basically HVAC duct out, and it would be a pretty short distance. And that way the smoke didn't have to travel as far to get out. So those were my considerations for location. The two walls are external walls, and this basement does sit underground. So I was going to get to take advantage of all that as far as insulation and ambient temperature and not having to worry too much about big changes in temperature. I was only going to have to do two internal walls getting built out, and the ductwork was really not going to be an issue because I'm right on the corner of the house, so I could basically avoid everything. And that's, for me, how I decided on the location. Next up, after location, there's the size consideration. Now, I thought, and my wife and I kind of went through a few stages of kind of deciding on what we're going to do with this room. We did everything from kind of think about a small, almost closet with just one seat, a TV, exhaust fan, and it would just be a very small space that we had to contend with smoke, and it'd be really easy to manage cigar smoke in a smaller space. We went all the way to leveraging one of the larger spaces in the basement and making it a big bar and a big game room and TV sitting area room where we could have a lot of people in there and a lot of different activities. And it would be a larger portion of the room or of the basement and kind of a bigger part of the basement finish. But in the end, what we decided on was somewhere a little bit closer to the small closet than the big game room bar area. And we decided on a 15 by 15 room, a square down here in the corner, like I said. 15 by 15 would give me enough space to have plenty of sitting area for, I was thinking 4 to 5 people. And we decided that a 225 square foot room would be good for that, would be ample for the 4 to 5 people, especially since mostly it's just going to be me down here. So 15 by 15 room is what we decided on, and that ended up being a decent choice. It's worked out pretty well. If I haven't mentioned it yet, I've been in the room for 8 months now. The renovation or the basement finishing finished at the beginning of the year, or just before the beginning of the year. And I've been in here and having cigars in the house in here in this room for 8 months. And the things I'm going to talk about next, the actual kind of technical aspects or considerations of getting smoke to not seep into the rest of the house, worked. So that's why I thought I would make this video, because I didn't think that there was that much information out there already. And this is kind of the process I went through. All right, so we talked about the location, we talked about the size of the room, and now we're starting to kind of jump into what was actually going on as far as the renovation. Really, the framing was the first kind of big deal for the contractor actually doing something in here. In the framing stage for me, that was a good time to talk to my contractor, like I said, about the exhaust fan, but not only that, which, by the way, the exhaust fan is something I had to keep advocating for. I had to work and communicate throughout the process to make sure that that got installed the way I wanted, because it's not something that they do all the time. It's not something that they're asked to do, so it's not in their wheelhouse. And you should be willing to do that and ready to do that if you're building out your kind of indoor cigar lounge solution with a contractor. If you're doing it on your own, obviously you're good to go. But if it's a contractor, it might not be something that they're doing all the time. So especially the specific things related to your exhaust fan or the integrity of the insulation, the airtight kind of scenario that you want to create, you got to advocate for that over and over and make sure it gets done right. That's going to be something you might have to take a more active role in than the rest, at least for me, than the rest of the basement, where it was kind of everyday job for them. Anyway, the framing, the exhaust, like I said, but the framing stage was also a good time to talk about where I wanted the electrical outlets and any kind of built-in or like wall features that I was going to do, as well as where the door was going to go. So for me, the outlets, the outlets to code would have been more than enough down here, but I also wanted to make sure to add some outlets kind of higher on the back wall, the wall that you see right when you walk into the cigar lounge. And the reason for that is I wanted to be able to mount my rabbit air eventually so that the smoke could get sucked in through the bottom of it efficiently and then blown up kind of through the top. And then I also wanted to be able to maybe add a neon sign or some sort of a light or something that you could see right when you walked in. So I asked them to add 2 outlets kind of up at the top of the wall, not all the way at the top, but toward the top of the wall. I also wanted to make sure that there was enough, that there were outlets for a TV in one of the locations where I could mount it, and it had kind of a wall feature. So I asked for that, even though I'm not using that area for a TV. If I do ever change anything up and want to, I've got the outlet that's high up on the wall, as well as the tunnel for cables. So I could always put a TV there if I wanted to. And then the other consideration was the lighting and the accent walls, or like feature walls. Lighting, I just wanted to have enough of it in here so that there was plenty of light. And I also wanted to make sure that they were dimmable. So the regular recessed lighting that they did in the rest of the basement was fine for me. And I got 4 of them in this 15 by 15 room. And that's more than enough. Making them dimmable was a really good idea. That's really nice if you're watching something, just having a cigar down here. Having dimmable lights is, that's nothing new. There's 2 places where there's like structural columns, and they were able to build basically wall accents and features around those. One of them, eventually when I put a bar in here, is where I'm going to put built-ins for bottle storage. And the other one, like I said, could be a TV or a feature for, right now I've got a picture that I took, printed out and on the wall. I think it looks really sharp. And then just because of the way it looks, there's also another place where I put the guitar that you've seen in the picture. That's there too, and that also even looks like a little bit of a feature sitting there over my cigar storage. And then next to that is where I've got the door. And the reason that the door is at the back of the room is because I wanted it to be sitting in front of where the exhaust vent is, The exhaust vent is here, and then in front of the exhaust vent is where the door is. So in that way, I felt maybe that I could get the smoke out of the room, you know, a good 3 feet before it ever even got to the door. But it's also kind of in a good spot for where the circulation is. So it was just my kind of attempt at making sure smoke didn't get out of the door, because if that's where the vent is, that's kind of where the vent would be creating that negative pressure. So it would be pulling through that door anyway. So almost pushing the smoke back into the room and sucking it up through the vent. That smoke doesn't even have a chance of going out there. And that worked in that way. So I think that was a good decision. I don't know if that's necessary, but it's what I did. And it worked out. Now that we had the framing stage of the room done, the next big thing for me as far as this indoor cigar lounge build was going to be what I do for insulation. So I realized pretty early on that the insulation that I choose for this room is going to be important in keeping smoke from leaving the room. There is a Cigar Aficionado article that was pretty good. And reading that article, I realized that really the best way to do it was to make this room as airtight as possible. And the best way to do that was with closed cell, professionally installed spray foam. And that's what I decided on. I decided on the closed cell spray foam, and I worked with a local company that usually works with either big factories or like metal buildings that people put up, or local stores. And even working with them, I realized that not a lot of indoor cigar lounges are really going up, because this was the first time. He'd been with the company for 3 years. This was the first time that he did an actual, like, just one room in a house. So that's what I decided on. After working with them and telling them the situation, they came out to look at the room one time. What we decided was that, and again, here's where the 2 external walls kind of saved me some money, because these walls being external, there's no worry about smoke getting out through that cement wall. So what we decided on was that we were going to do the entire ceiling. So the entire ceiling was going to get spray foam. The bands are basically that area between the floor joists where it connects down to the foundation, or even if it's the floor above. But in this case, the bands are what connects down to the foundation. So the bands were a way to make that connection, even though the external walls didn't get spray foam, spraying those bands down. So from the ceiling down the band made that airtight kind of enclosure, along with obviously the 2 internal walls that got fully sprayed with the closed cell foam, just like the ceiling. So that's what I decided on. And basically that's making the room airtight. And they went through and tested it. They looked, basically the way they tested with a flashlight. They used a flashlight in all the corners. It's another place where you can advocate for yourself and get in there and check as well. See if there's any sunlight showing through anywhere. Get in whatever position you have to get behind walls. Look, make sure you've got an airtight spray foam installation, because that's really going to be key down the road for keeping the smoke in here. As far as the ceiling goes and the internal walls, look, because it's easy enough in the corners to see if there's light shining through on the other side, especially since this was still unfinished space. But the ceilings, before they leave, come in here and check everything and make sure that you've got coverage and that it looks, you don't do it every day. I don't do it every day. So you do your best to advocate for yourself, but that is a good time to kind of check and make sure that you've got a thorough spray foam installation and working with a reputable company, obviously local to you, so that you can see reviews is where that comes into play. To finish up the installation part of the video, the only part of the room that's not airtight, obviously there's like basement windows here, but those are airtight like a window is. The walls and the ceiling are now airtight. The only part that's left is the door. The door, like I said, is a tricky one, because certainly you should weather strip it, and we'll talk about that later. That's what I did. But it's okay if that part isn't airtight because you do want the exhaust fan to be able to create negative pressure. So you do want it to have somewhere where it can pull some air in. Again, smoke rises, so the bottom of the door is a good place where you might not worry as much if you've got a rabbit air going and an exhaust going. You might not worry as much about smoke being able to push through that negative air that the exhaust fan creates. So that's kind of what I did. You got to be careful with this though, because when you're not in the room, and I always make sure to throw away the ashes, make sure no cigars are left in the ashtrays, because that stuff can really get some smells to it, and really create a stagnant kind of not pleasant cigar lounge smell. Usually it smells like a really nice smell in here. I like it. But if you leave your ashes and your cigars in the ashtrays, it's going to create a really disgusting smell. And the door not being airtight is where you might run into trouble with that if you're not down here at least, twice a week or something like that, where that smell might get through under the door. Easy way to tackle that is to put your exhaust fan on a daily 2-hour timer where it's running at whatever level is reasonable. And that's really going to help you with not getting smell to seep out. So we're not talking about smoke anymore. We're just talking about kind of the smell of the room seeping out into the rest of the basement. With the foam being installed, it's definitely not going to go up into the rest of the house, but it could get under that door and into the rest of the basement. So that's just something to take into account. Right. So now it's time to consider what we're going to do with the smoke. What I decided on was that in order to create negative pressure in the room, I was going to need an exhaust fan. And in order to cycle the air in the room at a very fast pace or rate, I was going to need an exhaust fan. And in order to get the smoke out of here and exhaust it, I was going to need an exhaust fan. And choosing an exhaust fan was simple. There is a Reddit article, and I think it's out there from 2020, or a post on the Reddit Cigars subreddit. And in that post, there's a guy that kind of goes through what he did, and he talks about AC Infinity fans. I'll put a link for as much of this stuff as I can in the description. So all the information for the AC Infinity fan will obviously be in that Amazon post. But basically, all the air in this room with that fan can get cycled, can get turned over every 2 minutes. I thought that was fine. I think the one thing with so I'm happy with the AC Infinity fan. I'm happy with that jet style exhaust fan. I think that was the right way to go. I think it'd be really hard to get smoke out of the room any other way. So I'm happy with it. The only difference, or the only thing I would do different there is I got the 6-inch duct for that, or the 6-inch opening, because I just didn't want to have a huge hole to the outside of the house. That doesn't matter as much. I should have gone with the 8 or 12, just because then I could have run the fan at a lower level, maybe at a 4 instead of a 5 or something like that, and that matters because of noise. So it probably would have also been stronger, so it could cycle the air faster. But the 6-inch AC Infinity exhaust fan is ideal in here. I'm never having to run it higher than level 5 when I'm in here by myself. I've had up to 3 people smoking cigars in here before, and for that it had to be at a level 8. So even that isn't at a 10, and it does a great job. But just getting the smoke out of here isn't the only thing. And an exhaust fan is really going to have a lot of trouble sucking that smoke directly in. It's not like some super powerful, thing. It is strong, but it's not like sucking the smoke from where you're sitting. Unless you're sitting right under it, it's not. It's the smoke basically can like congregate on its own. Like it slowly travels, and then once it gets close to the vent, you can see the vent create a little whirlpool and start sucking the smoke up. But it takes a while for that to happen, and that's where the rabbit air comes in. Just getting the smoke out isn't enough. You gotta also clean the air so that you're breathing in clean air when you're in this room. If you're smoking cigars, that's super important. You don't want to be just breathing in secondhand smoke. You want to be breathing in clean air. Rabbit air, the A3 is what I have, is going to do that. Secondly, it's going to suck in air and then push out that clean air through the top. But even though that's clean air coming through the top and you're breathing that clean air, which is really good, it's also acting as a way to circulate the air in the room so that, again, all of that air is getting pushed to the vent so that there's no stagnant, kind of like slow moving smoke in the room, because the rabbit air is actually creating circulation so that it's helping make the exhaust fan more efficient. And the third thing is it does kind of eat some of the smoke too. It's also a smoke eater, but I've got it sitting on the ground, so it's not doing that as much, but it is detecting when that smoke is in the air. It is clean in the air, so it's recycling and then giving me nice clean air, and then it's creating that circulation. If I had to choose, and I was in here by myself, between having the exhaust fan on and having just the rabbit air on, I would pick just the rabbit air, because if it's just you in a room this size, that rabbit air is honestly more than enough. If you really needed it to only have one of them, it's going to do a good job, and it's important because it's creating that clean air. You should definitely, if you can have both options, go with both options though, because you really want to efficiently cycle the air in here and get the smoke out of the room so that you're breathing in clean air. I was lucky enough that I was able to initiate and start a relationship with Rabbit Air, and they were willing to have me test their A3, their minus the Rabbit Air A3. They were willing for me to test it, and then I put a video out a little while ago on my first use of it in this lounge and having a cigar that first time, and it worked great without the exhaust fan on, and it's been great since then. Honestly, it's invaluable in having a clean air indoor cigar lounge. For me, I didn't really even look anywhere else. I reached out to Rabbit Air at the onset of this project, because every cigar lounge that I've been to in my area, they have a Rabbit Air on the wall or a few units. So for me, that was more than enough. If cigar lounges are using it, then it's tested enough for my small indoor lounge use. So that's all I needed. And honestly, since it's been in here, it's probably the most important piece of this whole build out, because it's giving me that clean air to breathe when I'm having a cigar in here. So the Rabbit Air was a really good decision, and the Rabbit Air and exhaust fan combination together is more than enough, and is definitely what you need in order to create a clean air environment. Well, this has been a pretty long section, the what to do with the smoke section of this video, but I do think it's basically, like I said at the beginning, it's the most important consideration to make outside of kind of the insulation and what you're going to do. But even with that, if you can get the smoke out of the room fast enough, and then you've got a way to keep the air in here clean, then the other stuff just kind of falls in place. So the last things I'll mention in this section are that neither the exhaust fan nor the Rabbit Air are silent. They both can be very quiet on both of their first initial settings, like 1 through whatever. They're very quiet, and you can easily have a conversation, no problem. The exhaust fan, once it gets to like a level 6, 7, you can definitely hear it. Even at a 4, it's noticeable. But once you get to an 8, which is as high as I've had it in here, like I said earlier, it impacts conversation. So at an 8, it's a part of it's one of the people in the room. You're probably going to mention it a few times. It's that loud. So that's just something to take into account. Like I said, maybe getting the bigger unit is something that might help with that. The Rabbit Air only gets as loud at its maximum setting as the exhaust fan on like a 4 or 5. So the Rabbit Air is better at its maximum setting. But like I said, neither of them are silent. So that's something to take into account, that these are constellations you're going to be making. There's going to be some noise pollution introduced into your room by having to exhaust the smoke and clean the air. The other piece I wanted to touch on, it's worth it to have the contractor or the electrician put an outlet in the ceiling where you're going to put not the vent, but where you're going to put the actual unit, the AC Infinity unit or your exhaust fan unit. If you've got an outlet right there, you can tuck the unit up into the ceiling. Then you can have it covered with some sort of solution. But tucked into the ceiling, it's going to cut down on the noise, obviously. But it's also going to make it so that it's a seamless look and you don't have to have like an exhaust unit sitting on your wall somewhere. And then you're dealing with, duct work, somehow having to put elbows on it and bend it. So having that unit in the ceiling is vital. And in order to not have to run the cord out of the ceiling, you want to make sure you get an outlet put in the ceiling for the exhaust fan. For heating and cooling the room, and this kind of goes along with the location of the room. For heating and cooling the room, there is obviously HVAC. There's a vent here in the room where it's dumping heat and cooling. But I usually keep that closed, especially if I'm having a cigar in here. Even though it's not a return, I just keep it closed anyway, just in case. Definitely make sure you don't have a return vent anywhere in your cigar lounge for the overall HVAC unit. Be careful, the contractor just won't think of that. You got to make sure you don't have a return, that it just doesn't work out to where they accidentally put a return in your cigar lounge. You got to make sure to look out for that for sure. But as far as keeping the room cool or hot, I've been in here in the winter and it's been very pleasant. It didn't get cold. Right now it's the end of July, so it's hot outside. It's not hot in this room at all. I think I'm taking advantage of ambient, temperature control by having 2 external walls and the basement being underground. And I also think I'm just taking advantage of the ambient cooling and heating that's happening on the other side of the wall. The closed cell foam, I think, is helping to keep a consistent temperature and kind of delaying, changes in the temperature down here. So heating and cooling this place hasn't been an issue at all, mostly because I'm in the basement. If I was in the attic, I think that'd be a big deal. I think the summertime, it'd be, that exhaust fan would be helping you cool the place too. And you'd have to have some sort of a solution so that you could maintain some sort of a normal body temperature up there, because I'm sure that an attic solution gets pretty hot. So that's that for the heating and cooling of this section of this room. So now we've got, basically at this point, the walls were up, the insulation was done, the walls went up, and I was ready for flooring in this room. And I decided on an epoxy floor on the concrete because of the look and durability. There are a few other things. Obviously, I wasn't going to do something like carpet because that would have been, they wouldn't have smelled good. But there were some different options. The locking, engineered or like PVC flooring, that like nice newer stuff that they have for basement floors, that had foam on the bottom of it. It had a vapor barrier and a foam. I didn't find any research on there of whether or not that foam could absorb smoke in some way. So I didn't even go down that road. And epoxy floors, I think, look great. And that's what I went with in here. I went with an epoxy floor. I got the oak finish and I got oak accents as well, so that the swirl or the like detail in the floor is just the same as the base color. This flooring is made to go on garages. It can deal with like oil spills. It can deal with heavy machinery sitting on it. On factory floors, it's supposed to last for over 10 years. So from a durability perspective, in this application down here for me, the epoxy floor is going to last, probably going to be good to go for at least 20 years. It looks really sharp, in my opinion, and it's durable. It's a hard surface, so it's not going to absorb any smoke smell. For me, it was the ideal choice, and I'm really happy that that's the way I went for this room. I like it a lot. The final consideration, once like paint was in and everything was kind of getting close to being done down here, was weather stripping the door. I kind of already went over that, so I'm not going to dive into it too much again. But basically, I wanted to make sure that when I'm not in here, and there is just kind of a cigar lounge or cigar smoke smell that's going to be in the room, no matter how well you clean it. Certainly opening the windows, having the exhaust fan and the rabbit air going regularly is going to make it so it's not a stagnant smell, so that it's not a gross smell. It can even smell clean in that way if you do that regularly. But I definitely didn't want anything seeping out, so like I said, I did weather stripping around the door, and at the bottom I left it so that the exhaust fan can create that negative pressure and it's sucking air in. Even where the weather stripping isn't perfect, it's kind of sucking air in as well. So it's helping to push the smoke back into the room. Definitely the smoke would have a really tough time pushing against that negative air pressure that the exhaust fan creates. So that's kind of what I did there. That's the one spot in the room, like I said earlier, that's not going to be airtight. There's not much you can do about that. The door not being airtight is something I thought I was going to be worried about much more than I actually ended up being worried about it. When basically finishing the room, one of the last decisions to make is material decisions. Like what kind of design, we already kind of went over. I wanted TVs and I wanted accent walls, but really materials are important in what you choose. So paint is important. If you're not going to go with some sort of like a wood paneling or some other kind of like faux brick or whatever solution that you're going to do to cover the wall, if you're not going to do that, then paint is really important. And my thought process is that you don't want to choose a light color paint. So obviously I went with black in here, and I did that because I want there to be as little possibility for the walls to kind of yellow from the smoke. Over time, I don't want to have like white walls in here and then they yellow from the cigar smoke. The other consideration was obviously for the floor. It's the same for anything else you're putting in this room. You want to have hard surfaces and you don't want to have fabrics. So anywhere that you might need to have a fabric, try having like leather. Like I've got the leather recliners and the leather sofa in here. Those are all just kind of something that I'm submitting as a consideration. I don't think anyone would go putting carpet in a cigar lounge anyway, but it's just something I wanted to talk about. All right, so the room got built out. I was able to smoke in here. I've been smoking cigars in here for 8 months. It works, luckily, because it would have been a decent amount of money if it didn't work. But speaking of the decent amount of money, if it didn't work, I'm going to go into, I've got it right here on my phone, so I'm going to be looking down, but the cost of what I kind of paid for everything. And overall, the cost was right around $11,000. Like the actual room built out, the electrical, the lighting, the duct kind of running out for the exhaust fan. So yeah, $7,000 for the extra room for the contractor that was already doing the larger basement area. For the spray foam, it was $2,100. For the epoxy floor, it was $900, but I did get a decent discount on that. So I think it can be anywhere from $1,200, $1,500 up to $1,800. You can add colors, you can add layers, you can do different things. So for me, it was $900, but that was with a little bit of a discount or a decent discount. So plan for potentially $1,500, $1,800 for that. The AC Infinity exhaust fan was $160. The Rabbit Air A3 is $750, and that's right around $11K for me. So every situation is unique. Your build out might be different, so that those costs might be different. I already had my cigar, my humidor. I already had some of the stuff that kind of makes this a cigar lounge. The chairs, I already had the sofa. I've already had all that stuff, so some of that was kind of inherent. And but that's it. $11,000 is what it kind of came out to for the build. I didn't do anything crazy special, so you could go as crazy as you want with it, and definitely make it a really cool space. But that's kind of a baseline, bare bones kind of cigar indoor lounge build out. So that's it. There you have it. That was the process I went through for building out an indoor cigar lounge here in my basement. It worked. It's good for me. I've been enjoying it. Like I said, The room itself isn't done. Just like with anything, there are other things I want to do down the line. I mentioned a bar a few times, kind of where the recliners are. There's enough space to put at least a 2 to 3 seat bar where I could stand behind it and then have all my bourbon bottles and things in that nook that's over there. It'd be cool to add some more seats on this side where I have that little like cabinet. That's my storage right now, but it'll evolve, and that's why I was mentioning with the electrical and stuff is as it evolves, you want to have the ability to move stuff around, and certainly that's going to happen down here for me. It's going to change a little bit. I'll keep you guys updated as that stuff changes if it's cool enough and good to mention. But there you have it. That's pretty much it. Feel free to ask me any questions. I was pretty active in this build out and working with the contractor, so I'm willing to answer any questions you might have. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I've got more content on the way, and have a good one.